Resident Evil was truly one of the pioneers of survival horror. It was one of the first to include zombie apocalypse to its storyline before it was a popular thing. Its intriguing gameplay and compelling story was enough to spawn several sequels through different platforms. There was one particular platform that wanted a shot to a fully portable rendition of the original Resident Evil for the Sony PlayStation, and that was a Game Boy Color. And so in today's episode, we'll take a look at the unreleased Resident Evil for the Game Boy Color. In 1999, Capcom wanted to follow up the success of the original Resident Evil by porting it out to other platforms. A Hotgen studio which was based in the UK was selected by Capcom to port the game to the Game Boy Color. Hotgen had big plans to port this title. They wanted to construct a direct conversion from the original PlayStation version with the same cinematics. They even wanted to expand on it by adding different enemies and the ability to disable traps. The game was also to include a new save feature which did away with the scarce ink ribbon feature of the original. There really isn't much else to say about the gameplay and visuals of the game because everything was going to be identical other than the diluted Game Boy graphics. I gotta say that Hotgen did a pretty decent job at transitioning the graphics from PlayStation to Game Boy Color. It's bad in today's standards, yeah, but in 2000, this would have been considered quite decent for a handheld device. In an interview with IGN Pocket, Fergus McGovern, who was the founder of Hotgen Studios, stated, "All of the characters and enemies in Resident Evil Game Boy are software scaled. So given the limited amount of CPU bandwidth the Game Boy has available, it is very difficult to have extremely large enemies, and even more difficult to have lots of enemies on screen at the same time. Speech was also a problem because the Game Boy is not suited for large amounts of speech, especially when it's critical to the game. The problem has been addressed by using a text window that appears at the bottom of the play area." And according to a Hotgen employee, the game was in quality assurance department for a very long time before finally, on March 22nd of 2000, it was announced that the game had been cancelled. The English to Japanese language communication barrier was cited as one of the main reasons for the game's setbacks. Capcom employees stated in an interview with IGN that they weren't confident that the game would have made both customers and Capcom happy. So in other words, they thought the game was going to suck and not sell well. Now it's just amazing to me how they were able to fit a 15-hour plus game into a small Game Boy cartridge. It's quite an accomplishment. Now since the game's cancellation, 2 separate prototype cartridges of Resident Evil have been recovered, and the story behind the recovery is quite interesting. A user from England by the name of N64Rick, whose real name is Rick Balker, started a thread on November of 2011 about some games he had acquired from a company that does house clearances near Yorkshire. The owner of a storage container had not paid their bill and some items were sold off to Balker. The contents of this container was quite interesting to say the least. Among the items were a Nintendo 64 development system, a Atari Jaguar development system, an internal Nintendo portfolio of documents detailing the marketing proposals, several different quality assurance products for Game Boy, Wipeout 64 prototype flashcard, Super Mario Land Game Boy EP-ROM development cartridge, a Bionic Commando Game Boy prototype cartridge, a Pong Game Boy prototype cartridge, and an unknown Game Boy Color 4MB prototype flashcard with the words Res Evil written on the back. The entire lot was bought by Balker for a total of $150 US. Now the question remains, who used this container? Now the answer to that may have been in the back of one of these Nintendo 64 flashcards that was found in the container. As you can see, it stated that the owner was The Games. Now after some research, turns out The Games Ltd is Nintendo's official English distributor. So it was possible that the original owner of this container was a former employee of The Games Limited. Now a second prototype cartridge that was found, which was labeled Cartridge 2, is an older version of the game and is considerably more buggy, and Chris is the only playable character in this prototype. It's important to mention that IGN previewed this game once and it showed off an enemy that was never seen in any of the builds, which is known by many as the Brown Zombie. Since the game was only about 90% complete, there is no final boss and no ending sequence. Now, from my understanding, there is no way to get into the final area of the game unless you change your positioning with an emulator. The ROM has since been dumped and is playable via emulator online. And that's the mystery of Resident Evil for Game Boy Color. Thank you guys for watching. Check out some of my other unreleased game videos while you're at it, and I'll see you next time.